Okay, so we're going to talk about No Mow May and beyond, and what else you can do, and kind of really what No Mow May was all about in the first place, the reasons, what it really means, and sort of debunk some of the myths and things like that. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, No Mow May was started by Plantlife 8 years ago this year. It was actually kind of in a throwaway comment, really, about something else we were talking to local councils about managing green spaces, and that's how it was born. But for anyone who doesn't know about Plantlife, really, really briefly, we're a wild plant and fungi conservation charity that works all over the UK, but also globally. So, hence, we are the global voice for wild plants and fungi. We have lots of areas that we work in, but in particular, we have at the moment our special sort of areas of focus are grassland, temperate rainforests, fungi, and also individual sort of species, rare species and relocations and introductions and that sort of thing. So we work in all of these areas across basically working with land partners in conserving areas. We are a membership organisation as well, so we have lots of members. We have our own nature reserves, about 24 of them. And yeah, we do lots and lots of things. So go and check our website out if you're not familiar with us. But right, what we're going to cover in this session is essentially what is No Mow May and why did it come about? What are the reasons behind it being our main campaign? And that's linked very closely with the fact that we've got this loss of species-rich grassland in the wider countryside. We're then going to look a little bit about hay meadow management and how that relates to No Mow May. And then we're going to look at sort of particularly like pollinators and other invertebrates and No Mow May, because that's something that often comes up every year, how you can take part and the kind of best practices or the best ways that you can get involved and sort of hints and tips. And then particularly some areas about maybe wanting to increase the diversity of your sort of microhabitats, your diversity of species of wildflower, but also other wildlife, and how you can sign up and what kind of resources are available. So what is No Mow May and why? So the reason why we came up with No Mow May is because out in the wider countryside, we have lost a huge amount of species-rich grassland. And it's actually 97% that we've lost, which is a little bit staggering. I'm going to go into the reasons why in a moment. But essentially, we saw this as a bit of an opportunity because there are about 23 million lawns or gardens in the UK that have the potential to be there, as a sort of mini little grassland habitat. And that's not even taking into account all of the other green spaces that we have. So road verges, churchyards, village greens, playing fields, and many more besides. So why not mow some of these areas a little bit less and manage them less like a green carpet and more like a place that we can share with wildlife? And that's kind of the whole idea behind it. Why May? So May is a really good time in terms of when the flowers and the grasses in grasslands, lawns, that sort of thing, really start getting their growth going. Now, if you're lucky and you live in the south of the UK, then you might find that actually you could probably start this in April and you'd get great results as well. But if you live much further north or up in Scotland, then April might be a little bit early. So we've gone for May because it just nicely sort of suits everyone as a whole unit. It also helps that, of course, it rolls off the tongue with the no mow element. But really, the idea behind it isn't just about that 1 month only for stopping mowing. It is actually about the whole summer. But we wanted to target people who perhaps have never thought about their lawn in any other way other than a green carpet, an extension of their outside where they can walk on, lie on, play games on, etc. And not really seen it as anywhere else where you might get wildlife. You might have little things growing in there. So if you want people to look at things differently and do things differently, you've got to do baby steps. So the idea of May is that people could give it a go and see what they think, dip their toe into that, and see what people think about it. So essentially, if people try it for May and they love it and they suddenly have loads more wildlife coming in their garden, then hopefully they'll follow on our other advice and do it for a bit longer. But it's all about that change in attitude and behaviours. And we are starting to see that shift. But the idea is that you would keep it going in June for Let It Bloom June and Knee High July as well. So that eventually we end up with this no mow movement. Not no mowing ever, because we'll explain why. It's not about literally chucking your mower away. It's about this cycle of grassland management in your back garden. Does it mean your whole green space or lawn? No, it doesn't at all. It can just be a little patch if that's all that you want to do, or that's all you have. You just want to be practical about it. That's absolutely fine. This gentleman here just has a lovely little round circle that he leaves long for the summer, and the rest of it he mows short. Or maybe you do want to do all of your patch or your area, but you mow nice, just sort of distinctive paths through it, and that also looks fantastic. So really there's real flexibility on that kind of thing. So I mentioned before that we've lost that crazy percentage, that 97% of species rich meadows since the 1930s. So species rich grasslands, really, really important, great for wildlife, birds, all of that. But they're also really important in providing ecosystem services. So storing carbon, they're much better than those sort of more intensely managed grasslands, or quite a lot of other habitats. They're great for flood alleviation and general well-being as well. I'm just going to make sure that I've turned something on pause so that it doesn't, that's fine. Okay, now one might be wondering, and you may already know this, so apologies if you know it, but where have all the meadows and pastures gone? So we say that we've lost them all, it's not like we've just put them under the carpet. Where have they gone? So essentially, a lot of it is agricultural improvement. So during the war and before the war, there was a huge amount of pressure to produce our own food and to do this at higher intensity than we were doing it before. We also had a huge amount more animals that we're relying on for agriculture themselves, for the farming processes. We were using horse-drawn ploughs, that sort of thing. We also used horses out in the field, so we were, making a lot of hay. We switched over to mechanical. We suddenly needed to produce lots more of everything. So we kind of thought, right, how can we do this much quicker and more efficiently? And unfortunately, that meant that our beautiful meadows lost out. We ended up ploughing a lot of them up and reseeding them with a mix of rye and white clover that was kind of going to be much quicker at producing that high intensity food that those animals needed if they were grazing, or we could cut them multiple times a year for silage and haylage and that sort of thing. So that's where a lot of them have gone. Now, it doesn't mean that farmers are the bad guys here at all. A lot of farmers were terribly sad to see these things go, but the pressure that they constantly and previously felt from consumers, from policies, that sort of thing, to just get the food made now. But we've also seen a couple of times where, quite a few times, where the withdrawal of management has actually been the problem. So if you just shut up a meadow and walk away, essentially without doing any management, then you will lose that piece of beautiful biodiverse habitat anyway, because eventually it will be invaded by the much bullyish coarser grasses. Scrub will start to invade, and eventually in decades and decades it will try and be woodland. So all of those wonderful meadow associated species will lose out again. The other thing, we have lots of diffuse pollution these days, and also sadly we are seeing the loss of these beautiful meadows and pastures to development, and that does still happen, believe it or not. If the meadow tends to just be in a really convenient place, sadly it means it gets built on. So what do we mean by a meadow, though? So this is another thing that I think is quite important. And the media really haven't helped us out here, because quite often when they're talking about the loss of wildflower meadows, they tend to put a completely different mind's eye picture to this. So if you close your eyes right now and think of a meadow, what do you see? And I really hope, because this is an FSC webinar, you guys are all pretty clued up, you'll know what I mean. But lots and lots of people have this sort of image in their mind of what a meadow is. And actually, although these are native plants, these are more associated with arable farming. They are annual species that need constant soil disturbance annually before they'll come back. And there's no real grasses in there either. And although this is very beneficial for lots of insects, it's not represented or representative of what a meadow is that's sustaining all of our native meadow species. This would need to be sort of ploughed and reseeded every year, so it's not really sustainable either. this sort of thing where you get that mix of the grasses and the wildflowers that are opening at different times. You know, you've got your earlier species like your bulbous buttercups and your celandines at the earliest part of the year, and all your dandelions out. And then later on, you start to have your knapweeds and your sawworts towards the end of the year. So it's that kind of having this real progression of species. So that's what we mean by a meadow. And you can know there's huge amounts of diversity in terms of what kind of assemblage of species you'll get. You know, you'll have species that are associated with slightly more calcareous soils like this one, or other things, or local. You know, a northern hay meadow is a habitat in its own right compared to something down south. So there's all that local interest as well. And I mentioned about this hay meadow management. So this is particularly what we're trying to recreate in the idea behind No Mow May. And the idea is that in traditional hay meadow management, you would take livestock off around between that March to May period. So, you know, could be earlier, could be May. And you allow the wildflowers to grow during that growth period in between April to sort of end of July, August. And then you would come in with the tractors and you would cut the hay and you would leave it to dry and turn it over a few times. And then you would remove it as it bales and take all of that off the land. Then you would put animals back in to do what's called aftermath grazing. And that keeps it nice and short for the rest of the year while things are still growing. And then over that really cold, wet period, that's when you normally take the animals off so that it doesn't ruin the soil. And you put them back on again to do a little bit of light grazing at the beginning to remove that early growth or the thatch or anything like that, ready for the new season. Essentially, with No Mow May, that's what we're suggesting, but just not really with the animals and the tractors. So we're saying that, you know, from that May or that April point, you're letting parts grow long over the summer. And then you come in at the end to do your bit of sort of cutting and removal. And then you keep cutting and removal for the rest of the year. But obviously, over the winter period, the grass pretty much stops growing. So everyone actually gets a break from kind of looking after their lawns. And then you come back in again as the season kicks off before you want to start your, you know, your No Mow May area. And this cycle, repeated year upon year upon year, is what keeps hay meadows that have been managed like this so wonderfully biodiverse. So essentially, No Mow May is about trying to recreate a mini meadow or small meadow areas in your green space in your garden. I mean, I've got several No Mow areas, and that's how I manage it. I don't give over my whole lawn because I have got kids, but I do these big patches. And I mentioned that we were going to talk about insects and No Mow May, which so quite often we get a question about how, well, hang on a minute, you've attracted all of these wonderful insects and then you're cutting everything down. So obviously we try and remember that it's not just about May. If people can do it for longer, that definitely is going to benefit insects. But equally, if people decide after 1 month they want to cut it down, that's a shame, but maybe they've given it a go at least. And you can maybe just mow once a month and you'll still be benefiting some insects with offering pollinating flowers and things like that for them for nectaring. But if we look at the hay meadow cycle again, this time kind of next to roughly what a lot of our meadowy species of insects or invertebrates might be doing at the same time. So a lot of that kind of real activity happening between the sort of May, mid-July point. We've got a lot of things munching away on the vegetation. We've got a lot of the adults flying around and nectaring and getting the pollen off the flowers and laying eggs and all sorts of things. That point where we come in to cut the hay, a lot of things have finished those really, really sort of busy periods of life cycle. And they've naturally moved into the next stage where they've either crawled off to go and find a nice branch or a hedge or a fence to go and create a chrysalis, or they've buried underground to pupate if you're a moth, or if you're larger or you're a caterpillar and you're going to go and overwinter, you'll go find some nice little nook and cranny over on the side of the meadow to go and be. And then over that winter period, things are pretty much dormant until the cycle starts again. So you're not creating an amazing haven and then literally annihilating everything that's moved in. You are, again, just replicating that natural cycle that a lot of our wildlife is already working with. If you look at, for example, butterflies in particular, a lot of our species that are adults flying on the wing, that therefore needing those plants to kind of get their nectar and feed off, Things like large whites, small whites, common blues, grizzled skipper, brown argus, those are very much kind of our meadowy species, and they are active between that time when your meadow is looking its best. There's other species like the comma, the peacock, small tortoiseshell, red admiral. They have many broods throughout the season, so they're kind of managing just to have lots and lots of different life cycles. Whereas our other species that are maybe more active as adults later in the year, so that's sort of July to August or August to October, those are species that are very much more associated with quite specific habitats like chalk downland or heathland or that sort of thing. So, which are being managed very, very differently. So, we are not, again, that's not our sort of main meadow species that we're looking at. The other thing to bear in mind is that if you are an insect locally visiting some lovely flowers in somebody's No Mow May area, that's not your only option. So if at the end of July that area has been cut down, meadows have been cut down for hay in the wider countryside. The No Mow May areas are being cut down, maybe some areas in parks, school grounds, that sort of thing. That's not all that you've got. You've still got maybe some of those pastures that aren't cut at all. They're just managed with grazing. Uplands and downlands and things like that are still got all those flowering species. And you've still got people's herbaceous borders full of plants, and road verges and arable margins are still there. So there's options for these creatures while they're flying around. Now, if you would like to start out on the No Mow movement now, you already have, or maybe you're thinking for next year, but it's never too late. You can always start now. Think about where you're going to do it. So decide where in your garden or in your community could you start getting involved, and be creative. It doesn't have to just be a big block. You could go and do some funky shapes, but do bear in mind that if you are doing it in anywhere that's shaded, particularly with trees overhanging that are dropping their leaves in the autumn, that will make life much harder for you. A lot of these meadow species or species that are naturally in your lawn are ones that like full sun. And as soon as you start picking a shady patch, you're already going to find it a little bit difficult. You definitely don't want to be feeding your lawn, which always seems a little counterintuitive. When you're growing your wildflowers in your borders, you're putting on the manure and fertilizing and doing whatever you need to get those flowers looking their best. However, your lawn, really, the feeding for it is just for the grasses only. And what that means is they'll just outcompete any of the tiny little wildflowers that might be there, and they'll just take over. So you definitely want to be stopping feeding the lawn. And then simply, wherever your chosen areas are or your whole lawn, you stop mowing it. And obviously, I tend to stop it because I'm right down in the southwest around the sort of couple of weeks into April rather than the sort of true start of May. But if you're further north, then yeah, you could do it for May. And think about where you could maybe have different areas, different lawn length areas. So, you've got your short mown areas for your paths or where kids want to play. You've got your meadow areas. But then what about some untidy areas in the corners or along the side of hedges where really you leave it long for maybe 2 years at a time and only cut it down when it starts to get brambly or something like that? Because that is fantastic for things like amphibians, reptiles, mammals, and also the invertebrates to sort of go in over the winter period. But also just see what comes up in your garden. In that area that you're choosing to grow long, see what might pop up. A lot of people, sadly not myself, are lucky enough to have orchids pop up. I'm still waiting on my orchid, but they haven't come yet. If perhaps you've been doing this for quite a few years and you really don't have a lot of plant diversity and you want to encourage extra things, and I've introduced a few of our classic meadow plants, native ones, then that's something that you can do. And I think the best way is to plant native seeds in pots, and then grow them on a bit and then plant them out in the autumn. But there are other ways of doing it. So moving on into that let it bloom June and then that knee-high July kind of gets us on to thinking about those timings around the cutting periods. Again, this is something that people worry about because, they're worried about the insects all sort of sitting and maybe even reptiles and mammals have made a home in and you come in at the end of July. But you can do a couple of things here, and these are the bits of information that are worth bearing in mind. So that mid to end of July cut is the traditional hay meadow cutting time. Again, will vary from north to south or whatever. So, and seasonality. but that will maintain and enhance your botanical diversity. So if you keep this cycle going over the years, the number of wildflower species probably will increase. However, later cuts, so that's kind of the end of August, creeping into September time, that ends up favouring grass species. In particular, false oak grass loves this kind of management, and it starts to take over. And that's because essentially the grasses have got to a point where they're starting to feed all of the nutrients that they've got from photosynthesizing it back into the rootstock, essentially, and powering up for next year. And then they start to create nice big tussocky tufts and things like that. So in terms of a late cut every year, you will slowly see botanical diversity decreasing over time. And this is something that we see when areas that were once managed have ended up stopping managed completely. But why not kind of look at it as doing the best of both? So you could either, if you've only got one No Mow May area, you could alternate. So the one year you could do the classic mid or end of July cut. The next year you could leave it a bit later, and you alternate between the two. The other thing, which is what I personally do, I have different No Mow May areas. So I have one that I have yellow rattle, and I definitely cut it sort of towards the end of July and take everything off. But then I have another area that is very much full of common knapweed, and a few other things that I've put in there. And I leave that sometimes right until the end of September, mainly because I run out of time to do anything about it. It's great for insects. It's great, for those things that need that really late flowering time. But as a result, false oak grass has absolutely, started to take hold there. So some of the things that I put in there originally, like the meadow vetchling and the lady's bedstraw, they're struggling a little bit because they're just getting a little bit pushed out by the grasses. So it's worth bearing all these things in mind. But ideally, if you can create a sort of mix of these different lawn lengths, then nature will thank you, because it's all about diversity of habitats creates diversity of species. So you can have your meadow areas that are left long for the summer. You could even have areas that you maybe just cut once every 3 to 4 weeks instead, and that's kind of called a flowering lawn. So where things like clovers, birdsfoot trefoil, that sort of thing, the daisies, get a chance to flower, but you're not creating that big structure for animals to really move in. You're just creating that pollen and nectar source. And then you can have the areas that are right at the back or along the edges or somewhere untidy that you leave long, like I said, for a couple of years at a time. And that can be your cow path or your nettle patch, wherever it can be. But that's so useful for biodiversity. So that flowering lawn that I mentioned, so it's great if you can do this as part of your no-mow zones, and it creates that diversity of lawn lengths. But if you can't do the long for the whole summer because you don't have any way to tackle the long grass at the end of the summer, which I will come on to on the next slide. But if you can't deal with that, then maybe do the flowering lawn instead, because it is definitely better than just constantly mowing and keeping the green stripes. Extra steps that you can do. So if you have this wonderful scene in front of you, like in this picture, which was my mum's lawn a few years ago when she decided to do No Mow May, and she'd never done anything to it, and it was a sea of wonderful birdsfoot trefoil, lesser stitchwork, cat's ear, common sorrel. I was so jealous, and she'd never had to do anything to it. Then by all means, you probably don't need to do anything. So see what you have already. But if you do want to add in native species, then you want to sow native seed either directly onto the soil in the autumn after preparing the ground, or like I said, the slightly easier route is to sow native seed in pots and then plug plant them out in the autumn. Think about where you get your seeds, really, really important, because there is so much out there that is just not appropriate, that is sold as a wildflower seed, but it isn't. And I'll come on to that a bit in a minute. Now, yellow rattle, you might have heard of this one, the meadow maker. It's a tricksy little fellow. He is quite difficult to get established in your lawn. And it's partly because they need that vernalization, which some of our milder winters might be having some effect of, but also it's about where you're getting your seed and if it's fresh enough. So essentially, this is one of those plants that doesn't survive well with the seed from the previous year. So you need it this year's seed in order to sow it this year. And a lot of places are sadly, but selling out because it's getting more and more popular. But it's basically a semi-parasitic plant, so it takes half of its kind of nutrient needs from the grass species themselves. You need the fresh seed, as I mentioned, otherwise it's just not going to do well. If you can collect it locally, even better, although that's not always as easy to do. And you need to prepare your soil. That means really going down to that 50% bare ground. And I'll show you kind of what that looks like in another slide's time. And so in that autumn period, because it needs that cold snap really to what's called vernalize, which is just part of the process needed for germination. And you want to then make sure the following kind of early part of the season, so in that sort of February, March period, if grass starts growing early, which it does seem to be that every year at the moment, because we get that mild time, then you need to make sure that the grass is kept short before the seedlings start to appear, because they need light in order to be successful to sprout. And just to go into it, the yellow rattle, the purpose of it, and we use it in our grassland restoration, it's a management tool essentially to try and reduce the amount that the grass is taking over and kind of re-establish a balance of that 50-50 kind of wildflowers grasses mix. And these create the space where the other wildflowers can start to get a bit more control. But it can be tricky, so you kind of have to persist. Took me quite a few years to get it established in my little no mow patch, but now that it's established, it's absolutely going great guns. So this is just an example of when we say prepare the soil and scarify it to create that sort of bare ground. So this is obviously on a huge scale where we're doing grassland restoration on scale and introducing probably green hay, so hay that was taken from a species rich meadow, laying it on here in order to try and recreate a beautiful meadow. But if you can get it like this, then you've got more of a chance. And you might think, oh my goodness, that looks destroyed. But actually, grass is an amazing thing. And within 2 weeks, that would grow back and it wouldn't look anything like you've done anything there. So it really does need to be scraped back in order to give the yellow rattle its best chance. And fresh seed, very important. Native plants, in our gardens, of course, we have a mix of native and non-native. In our perennial borders, we've got all sorts of things from all over the world that we've cultivated, and some of it's fantastic for pollinators. But when we're talking about that recreation of that meadow kind of management on our lawns, then try, if you can, to stay native, because essentially we're trying to boost our biodiversity that's lost in the wider countryside. So I mentioned about the seed packet problem. So you could pop into your garden centre, your supermarket, and you'll see these amazing kind of wildflower pollinator friendly mixes, and you'll be like, oh, that looks amazing. But if we look carefully at this particular one that I've taken as an example, quite a lot of those species are actually not native at all. They're like California poppies and various other things, and most of them are annual species as well. So unless you're prepared to scarify like this and introduce a seed packet every single autumn, then this is just not really sustainable. However, I found this amazing packet. This is RSPB's, one of their little packet mixes. And you look on the back of it and there it is. It tells you exactly what's covered, and all of those species are native, and it's a really nice mix of everything. So very much, try and see what you're getting before you do. And the timings are really important. So you can sow things in the spring, but it is much harder because you're going to have to keep watering it a lot more, that sort of thing. So think about the wider reaching benefits for your No Mow May patch. So essentially, lots and lots of mammals will be benefiting from this, particularly those longer areas that you're leaving kind of by hedges and things like the edges. They are loving kind of scurrying along underneath. Hedgehogs are going to be coming in because you've got a lot more invertebrates there. And the bats, you might get more bat activity in your garden because, again, there's more invertebrates being attracted to your, increased interesting habitats. Reptiles and amphibians love the long grass in order to go and sort of, forage in for invertebrates, but also keep cool in. Toads and slow worms. If you are taking your cuttings, create a nice little cutting stack and compost pile, and you might even get slow worms in there. The garden birds will also be loving the increase in invertebrates, particularly if they're raising young. And obviously, there's been some recent sort of things coming out from the RSPB about reducing the amount that we're supplementary feeding our birds with, bird feeders and things. And actually going forward, that's even more of a reason to start looking at your lawn as another place to increase the natural food sources for our birds. And also fungi. So another one of those things that you don't want to be doing, as well as not feeding your lawn, is also not killing all the moss off. So a lovely mossy lawn that's kept short over that sort of September, October, November period can be fantastic for grassland fungi like wax caps and earth tongues and spindles and all sorts of wonderful things that the UK is so important for. We have some of the best examples of wax caps in the world. It's also great for carbon storage. So over time, if you're managing your grassland, keeping it longer and managing it like this meadow, as I said, species may increase over time, which actually makes your soil composition much more complex, which then aids to storing more carbon over time. You'll also be reducing the amount that you need to kind of water conservation and heat reduction from these long areas. There's been lots and lots of studies looking at how longer grass areas in towns and cities can add to the cooling of large areas, but also the grass itself will still be lush and green at the base of it where it's long, whereas the short mown areas, and we will definitely be seeing this again this year, I think last year was the same, will quickly get short and brown and really struggle in the high temperatures that we're seeing. So I mentioned about the how to deal with the long grass. So essentially, the most important thing is do check for wildlife before you come in and do your cutting. So the way to do that would be literally walk amongst it, maybe get a broom and give everything a good sort of tap, because animals will move away, and obviously do that in the direction of where they can go towards safety. So always work towards the side of refuge. So you're always allowing them an escape route. Never sort of mow or strim in a big circle right into the middle, because that's just trapping the animals inside. If you can, if you've got a strimmer, or you could get somebody to come in and do some strimming, borrow a strimmer, maybe have some community strimmers that people could use. That's definitely going to make life easier to trim it down, and then remember to rake away all of those cuttings. We don't want to leave them there to rot. And then you want to mow on the highest setting, but only ever asking it to do half a strip at a time. And sometimes you can do this part without the strimming first. Again, you're always just on the highest setting and asking it to do half a width at a time. And every time you come back, you do the same. And then you just gradually lower the mower settings like that. And then you simply carry on mowing for the rest of the season until the grass stops growing. And that ideally will keep it nice and biodiverse for the next year. What if you don't have a garden? Well, thankfully, there's lots and lots of places that are starting to embrace this idea of No Mow May, that you could get involved with community areas, big village greens. If there isn't one near you, maybe you could be the person that starts it. Contact your local council, your parish council, or that sort of thing, and say, it would be great if we could just have part of this to manage as a little meadow. Alternatively, if you've got balconies or window boxes, I've experimented before with growing a little meadow mix in a box, and it does work. It's a little bit more high maintenance because you might have to reseed it again the next year, but you can still get plenty of joy from it. So if you are already taking part but you haven't sort of told us that you're doing it, we would love to know. We've got our pledge on our website where you can go up and just say that you're taking part in No Mow May, and we would love to know, because it's really, really important to us to know how many people really want to take part. And we also have a huge amount of downloadable guides and activities. So we've got the signs that you can put up and explain what you're doing, and the posters. We've got colouring sheets for the kids, activities, and then sort of social media stuff. And everything is also available in Welsh too. So now, somehow I've managed to pull it back, despite that horrible interruption. And we have some time for some questions. So I will stop sharing.
Yeah, beautifully styled out there, Sarah. Okay, so we've got a few. Adele was asking, she said a few years ago, I think Plantlife offered a calculation of pollinators per square meter based on quadrat surveys that participants did. And she said it was great, really great for the children. Do you still do this? Will you do it again? What's the crack?
Yes, so that's referring to the sort of small citizen science project that we did called Every Flower Counts, which was great, and I do agree. We made the decision 2 years ago to stop doing that, partly because of generally low participation numbers overall. But also, what was really important is that the data we were getting in, we weren't able to kind of really use it in a way that made long-term sense. So we decided to pull back from it and think of a different way of doing it, essentially. So what I would say is it's not coming out yet, maybe not next year, but there is something that's going to be citizen science based to do with No Mow May that will be coming out in the future where everyone can get involved. And it will hopefully be simpler because Every Flower Counts was great, but it was potentially a little bit more complex and really tended to only people who could identify certain species, whereas we're hoping that this will be something that everyone can take part in.
What I would say, Sarah, is in the gap between then and now, the POMS, so pollinator monitoring scheme, do a really good thing where you do a little quadrat and you watch a little area you can log how many of certain types of pollinators you do. So I'll chuck a link in there. But
Yes.
I mean, it doesn't do exactly the same thing, but it kind of does the same sort of thing, and it uses data to inform biodiversity numbers and
Yes.
things like that.
Yeah, perfect.
Cool. Abby was asking, why is it harder to have a no-mow patch in a shaded area?
So essentially, part of it is to do with the plants that are in the kind of grassland habitats. They really like some full sun in order to grow. And when they're shaded, they tend to have to put a lot more energy into kind of growing taller and vigorous because they think if I just keep going a little bit taller, I'll reach the sun in a minute. So you end up with quite long, straggly plants for a start, which then puts a little bit more stress on the plant, and maybe they're just not going to do as well overall. The other thing is that the majority of the time they are shaded because of potentially trees or other things that are dropping nutrients back down into the soil, which again is just reinforcing all those big bullish things like your nettles, your docks, your cow parsley, and all those big grasses. And they'll be the things that will be doing best instead of your lovely little wildflowers. So you're always working against it a little bit, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. I have got a verge opposite my house that's owned by the school that I manage as a meadow for the year. And it is in shade under lots and lots of oak and lime trees. But you know, things like knapweed and the buttercups and the lesser celandine at the start of the year, when obviously the canopies aren't out, they're always still doing okay. So it's about picking the species that might still be all right anyway.
Amazing, thank you for that. Kieran was asking, how will hotter, drier summers affect the growth timings of plants?
Yes, so I think obviously we're probably all starting to notice things are flowering earlier and earlier every year. So yes, as soon as it starts to get a bit warmer, things will just start flowering and opening and then finishing sooner. Now, obviously, when you're talking about insect life cycles and they haven't necessarily caught up yet, then that is going to have an effect. So the effects of climate change are definitely being felt everywhere. But most of all, it's those species that are associated with the cooler upland regions. Some of our lowland species are probably still just about, they're doing okay. But yeah, it will be really interesting to see how our meadows change. The other thing, of course, is that the window for cutting is getting earlier and earlier. So obviously farmers out there will be wanting to cut when the weather, you know, if everything's nice and dry and everything's, you know, the weather's good, they will cut early. And so we have been seeing hay meadows being cut much earlier into June than they had previously. And obviously some of our later flowering species that some insects might rely on, that's not necessarily good news. So yeah, there's a lot of ways that this is impacting nature in general.
Brilliant, thank you. Becky was asking, when you trim or mow, do you have an indication of the ideal length, or does it vary? Is there an ideal length?
So if you're basically trying to cut it after you've had that lovely long growth period and now you're cutting it as if you're replicating a hay cut, essentially you want to then keep the grass ideally under maybe 5 to 7 centimeters for the rest of the year if you can. Definitely no more than 10 centimeters. That will probably be still too long and it will just be feeding its roots again. So yeah, keeping it around the 5 centimeter mark is probably good for the rest of the season.
Amazing, thank you. And do you know is asking, do you have many councils that sign up for No Mow May, or is it just individuals?
Loads of councils. So we do have a dedicated member of staff that is our green space and road verge officer who does that 3 days a week. And yeah, we have had lots and lots of road verges and green spaces from local authorities that are signing up to it. On our website, we actually have a whole page dedicated to green space and road verge management. And in particular, we've got some case studies that you can go and look at where councils are doing this and can show you the example. And things like Gatwick Airport and other places are definitely taking this on board.
Oh wow, amazing. You are smashing these questions, Sarah, I'm not gonna lie. Um, Janet is asking, leaving small haystacks has become more common in grasslands. This is obviously great for overwintering invertebrates, but is there an issue with leachates into the soil?
That's a very good question. I would say if you're leaving an area that is rotting down regularly and you're leaving it in the same place, you will likely see that those nutrients will be leaching out and are probably only affecting that small area, but you will end up probably with a bit of a nettly patch. Just the same as if animals have been fed with supplementary feeding and sort of a grill, you will notice that the botanical kind of composition is different under those areas again because of the nutrients. So I wouldn't say this is a problem that we see as a real thing to worry about. I'd say there are much bigger problems like availability of local seed and grazing, opportunities. That sort of thing is much more of a problem. But yeah, it's worth kind of keeping an eye on these things at a local scale.
Amazing. We've got a sentient iPhone, the 90th of its kind, and they're saying that their meadow is on a dry, sandy soil, and they feel like there isn't much advice about that. Do you have any advice, or is it something that maybe you guys could give more emphasis in future?
Yeah, I would have to go and check, but I'm sure that on our website somewhere we have some lists of species. It might be that it's linked onto our Magnificent Meadows website that's sort of associated, but it has lists of species that are appropriate for various different soil types. And yeah, if there isn't something on our website, then definitely, go if you're looking to introduce species to that kind of soil type, then somewhere like the British Wildflower Seeds website, they do specific mixes that are suitable for dry, sandy soils, or even, by county and that sort of things that you can buy in and introduce. If you've already got an amazing species assemblage, then the main thing to take into account with managing it is, are you finding that the majority of botanical interest is flowering earlier in the year because they're small annuals, which are often associated with sandy soils? In which case, then you want to be doing that cut a little bit earlier and keeping everything short. Okay. Is that right?
Yeah, cool. What I'll do is I'll see if I can find a link, and if so, I'll whack it in the follow-up email as well. See if we can find anything. Graham is saying something very similar. So he's like got a heavy clay area which has become dominated by narrow leaf plantain. I'm assuming similar things as you've just mentioned.
Yeah, again, so heavy clay is a bit of a trickier one because it tends to hold on to its nutrients a lot more. So there are certain species like oxeye daisy and knapweed and stuff, which is a lot more tolerant of those heavy nutrient conditions. But yeah, you might find that you're wanting to do maybe again, once you've done that sort of July cut, I'd say if you are holding on to the nutrients because of clay, you don't want to be leaving it too late. That's one of the examples where you don't want to be allowing everything to kind of feed back into its roots. So not really suitable for those September cuts. Otherwise, you'll just see that those more dominant species taking over again.
Yeah, we've got one comment in the chat. And I think you've kind of covered this anyway, but that they're saying, is there more benefit to leaving some areas shorter for short flowers like clovers to flower, as well as leaving areas to grow really long? I think this goes back to when you were saying about diversity of habitats.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if I could create the dream wildlife garden from scratch, then you're going to have an area that's short by, the traditional standards of short, so it's mown weekly. Then you're going to have an area that's maybe mown just once every 3 or 4 weeks. That's for your clovers, your other short flowers, and then you've got your meadow areas, and then you've got your long grass areas. And if you can create all of those different lawn lengths, you'll be absolutely winning.
Okay, and I do one more question, and I think you've earned your you've earned your rest. Julian's asking, with yellow rattle, do they take better using plugs, which are often more expensive, or versus buying fresh seed?
I would say always persist with the fresh seed if you can, because the plugs are very expensive. They are annual species, so if they don't do well, and looking at the summer that we might be having, then if they die off, all that money's gone to waste because they're not perennial species. So definitely just keep trying with the seed, which is much cheaper than trying with the plugs. The other thing to note that about any kind of plug planting is you do have to garden around the plugs once you've put them in. You can't just put them in and walk away. You've really got to keep everything short around it.